Blinding light. Welcome everybody to one of the final sessions here in Edinburgh, but really one of the most significant. It was interesting this year that Kevin Spacey, stood up and talked really essentially about creativity, and not just about creativity, but about the extraordinary things that are going on out there. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of those themes. It's a time of incredible opportunity. I think we all agree about that. And not a time for complacency, I don't think. I mean, you saw sessions about commissioning and how that can be made more effective and better. All kinds of things are going on in small places which could explode in minutes and turn into something extraordinary. But this is about leading creativity, enabling creative people to do their best work. Do we even need leaders of creativity? Well, to some extent, Kevin rather provocatively suggested maybe we didn't, but maybe we do. So today, what we're going to do is we've got a group of creative leaders here, and I'll introduce them in a second. My name, by the way, is Alan Yentov. I'm the creative director of the BBC, and I'm a program maker and always have been. And I'm a believer in that, but I also happen to believe that leadership and making creative people have the best opportunities they possibly can is an incredibly important thing to do. We're going to show you, first of all, a survey, which is fascinating because it's sort of positive in some ways, but suggests that we could do a lot better. You're going to have a look at that in a second. And then we're going to look at, first of all, the vision, and then at the processes. How do you get people to be more creative? Is it possible to have a way, particularly in big organizations, of managing creativity? And what is the culture? What are the various cultures in which they thrive? And the way this works for different people and between people. It's kind of interesting, this, about how you sustain individuality and how you create teams. We'll discuss the key differences, too, between being a creative and leading creativity. And see in the end if we can come up with ideas about how we could do better. First of all, I'm going to introduce the panel. On my far left, I'll start with boys, that's the way it goes. Nick Kerwin, who's the founder and director of The Garden, who's a program maker who launched The Garden with Magnus Temple in 2010. He's done many programs which have been successful, including 24 Hours in A&E, and they've seen themselves, he saw himself on the shortlist for Indie of the Year last night, so congratulations, Nick. Okay. Before that, Nick and Magnus founded Firefly, later to become Dragonfly, renowned for The Family and One Born Every Minute. So he's really had a life in the indie sector. He describes the vision for Garden as being twofold: to make cutting-edge, ambitious, factual programs, and to be the most ideal production company they can be. That's quite a thing there, where program makers can make their very best work and deliver exceptional television. Next to him is someone with a significant and established reputation in another medium, because Farah Ramzan Galant is now the CEO of All3 Media, which is, as you know, a composite of a number of different television independent companies, which is a really at the heart, really, of program making in Britain today. Farah joined All3 Media in November 2012, just very recently, after working at the UK's biggest ad agency for 22 years. That's nothing compared to how long I've been at the BBC. 7 of them as chief executive. And at that time, it says here, she had never made a TV program. Bringing the experience of a stellar career in the world of advertising at AMV, BBDO, earning her a CBE. Do we have to address you in any different way? Or is
Only
that...
you, Alan.
Okay. Farah prizes freedom, independence, and sovereignty. That's quite an interesting mix there. And sees her challenge as managing strong creative characters to get to good commercial outcomes. On my right here is Elaine Bedell, who I've worked very closely with over the years. She's been in radio, in television, in the BBC and in ITV. She started her career at the BBC in 1987, it says here, Elaine, as the youngest ever network radio producer, and has since been head of factual entertainment at Tiger Aspect, managing director of Chrysalis. She's run the commercial enterprise of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and came to the BBC to become eventually commissioning editor for features, factual entertainer, and then controller of entertainment. And recently, well, it was actually in 2009, that to we older people, that's recent. She joined ITV as Director of Entertainment for Comedy, and ITV yesterday got Channel of the Year. So congratulations to Elaine on that too. And finally, but certainly not least, is Carrie Cracknell. And I've seen a lot of Carrie's work before at the Gate Theatre in Notting Hill, where she did amazing stuff. Carrie has just joined the Royal Court, working with Vicky Featherstone, who's also the sister, by the way, of Jane Featherstone, who is also a stellar person in our industry. She was previously, as I said, joint artistic director of the Gate Theatre in Notting Hill, and became known for the kind of experimentation she did, blending contemporary dance with theatre and reinterpreting classic international plays. She was also an associate director of the Young Vic Theatre, and it's going to be really interesting to hear from Carrie about creative model outside, if you like, television, and what we can learn from that. And we're talking about small and big, about where there is salience. So the first thing we're going to do is to look at this survey, and we're going to run this VT and see what you make of that, and then we're going to talk about it. Well, you know, as you look at that, we think we live in a sort of a place where all kinds of things are going on, but it is a creative industry. That's a pretty damning report there. And particularly for big organizations, but even for smaller organizations, it seems that those who are new to the industry feel they're not getting listened to, and that those who have been there for a long time feel it's getting worse. Now, before I come to Farah and others, let me ask Elaine, actually, first about this. I mean, is that fair? Is it true? And why are they saying that? Why is there this frustration?
I agree, it's a bit disappointing. But I'm always struck in Edinburgh, particularly when we have, you know, when we all get together, I don't know what a group of television people should be called, a rabble of television people, but you know, how good we all are at creativity, actually. I think we're also incredibly good at self-flagellation, and I think, you know, we strive for perfection, particularly in television all the time, and we're probably incredibly self-critical. But I think those kind of headlines about the sort of creative leadership that you want, more, you know, more me time, you know, diary efficiency, all of that, I think that's absolutely true. People need to have clear goals, but then they need to have the space in which to kind of operate. And, it's incredibly important that people have trust, and that trust goes kind of up and down, that you trust your creative leaders to articulate what the goals are, but then they trust you to kind of have your space to go off and do it.
What would you say to that, Nick, from your experience in working, obviously, in a smaller company? There's an issue about big and small, which we should come to at some point. You know, does creativity thrive better in smaller groups?
Well, yes, and when we end up talking about that, I mean, I think if you're in a smaller organisation, it's much easier to lead a team than in a big organisation. So I've got an easier job than some of these guys.
But what do you make of what you read there? What do you
I agree with what Elaine said. I think there are other issues as well. I think there's, despite the fact that people come up to Edinburgh and have a good time, I think there's quite a lot of fear in the industry. I suppose two things. One is I think there's quite a lot of fear of failure. You can, in a lot of even small organisations, there's a sort of desperation sometimes, a sort of real panic about the pipeline and what the turnover is going to be next year and meeting targets and so on and so forth. And I also think that another issue is that the industry is becoming more and more professional in a way that I suppose is kind of copying the States, where it's super professional to the point where it kind of doesn't leave so much room for the kind of quirkiness and oddities and personality and the intimate nature of creating things.
All right, let's come back to that. Let's just ask Farah quickly whether she's surprised to see that before we move on and actually look at some substance about how people think they should be doing. Are you surprised to see that survey?
Actually, no, I'm not surprised. If that was a survey that had been done in advertising, I think it would be remarkably similar, because I think innately in creative businesses, people are restless. So you can look at data in a variety of ways, and I would see that as people saying there's a restlessness to do better, a restlessness to communicate better, for big organizations to think like little ones. I think that's endemic to a creative enterprise, that you want to think small, even if you're big. You want to be able to be more agile. You want your leaders to be clear about what they stand for. So I think those themes are endemic themes in a creative industry.
Well, let's ask Carrie quickly before we look on that. Does that look familiar to you? Do people in the theatre, are they always complaining about the leaders?
I think one of the fundamental differences actually between theatre and television is that theatres are run by directors typically. So it's a slightly different structure in that sense. And I think in a way, if they're to be successful, the heart of it has to be about the artistic work and the artistic kind of leadership. So there are lots of complaints, and there are lots of things that we become very anxious about when we're making theatre, mainly about reach, actually, and how we connect with our audience. But I think ultimately the sort of conversation at the middle of it always has to be about the quality of the material and about the kind of artistic leader, really, as the key producer.
We need to look at that a bit, because, again, it's to do with small and big. And, of course, we're talking about broadcasters in the end being the commissioners and in charge, and therefore everybody's looking in that direction. So, and they are big organizations, and, you know, Peter Fincham is the program maker. I certainly am and have been, and a lot of the people running these things are, but somehow or other, when you're a leader up there, it's slightly different. So let's look now at this next section, which is the vision and strategy section.
Good leaders make people admire them. Brilliant leaders find the admirable in their workers and release that into the organization. It's very important to make your workforce feel that they're working towards a bigger cause than just daily carrying out their daily tasks. And you need to get your workforce to fall in love with excellence. Sometimes when you start a project, you don't know what the vision is. And part of your time is one of finding it. Ultimately, what vision is carving out a piece of meaning out of something vast. It's about sometimes sitting with the unknown and seeing what appears, and then conceptualizing that as the vision that everyone follows. I try and articulate the journey ahead for all of us, what the pitfalls might be, what the risks are. So I'm incredibly transparent with the staff. I don't hold the material in my head and think I'm just secretly going to deliver this strategy top down. I try and get the whole staff team to understand that we're doing it together.
The projects that we take on have got to have something that's got a narrative about them, and like a lot of designers, we're not driven by money. There's got to be a reason. It's got to be either doing things that are cost effective, it's got to be doing things that are sustainable, it's got to be doing things that genuinely improve your day-to-day existence, and that gives you the narrative, that gives you a raison d'etre, and it gives you something to work towards, and it's always better. I think human beings are always do something better if they're not working towards lining their pockets.
And you're still working on G-Plan Future?
So we set a vision and the team all buy into a vision, and everybody's working in their different places. It could be even in different towns, but we're all working on the same project. And occasionally, like with anything, when you're not together, things slip. But then, you know, my job here is to bring everybody's vision back together and keep it all back on track again. And we have to do that every few weeks on every project that we're working on. A vision is always there to be altered, to be tweaked, and to be scrapped. You know, quite often throughout the process, you're testing a vision, and the whole point of being creative is to take risks. And we've learnt over the years to be totally open to that and to realise that you don't really get anywhere unless you're prepared to fail. I think the important thing about anybody who is leading a team or being creative or having visions is knowing when to let go, and that might be, you know, very quickly after you've had that vision. And we're always doing that.
I do think that a sense of humour is important as a leader, because it's best that you debunk yourself before anybody else debunks you.
If somebody was to ask me, like you're doing now, you know, what is it that makes me a visionary leader? And I'm glad to be called a visionary leader. It's that I'm not afraid to take on things that I feel are a journey of discovery. And I'm not afraid to make mistakes along the way in the learning process. But what I am afraid to do is to leave a problem that's clearly there untouched.
My big advice to creative leaders is get over yourself and remember that you are only quality insofar as you deliver quality. The minute you're preoccupied with your own position, you are immensely weakened. You know, suicide bombers and good leaders have something in common, and that is they're both prepared to write themselves off.
I should say, by the way, that I am the chairman of Kids Company, and Camilla has not yet suicide bombed. Farah, what do you make of this issue of being a visionary creative leader? What is the job, do you think, of a creative leader, and how do you see yourself?
So I know I have a strong conviction about what it is not, because I think as businesses grow, and to Nick's point, professionalize, I think it's the watch out is that, you know, your vision and your strategy and the structure to make you successful can become meaningless drivel that's really designed to keep shareholders happy. So I think you have to be really careful that when you articulate a vision, you understand what you're doing for shareholders, but for your internal community, as you lead talented creative people, I think it's quite simple that you define in a really compelling way what you believe in for the organization. The people are looking, like any tribe, for a belief, and that you say what you believe in. And somebody very wise once said to me, the job of a creative leader, Farah, in addressing me, is that you've got to put people at the center of their world, not at the periphery of yours. So you have to find a way as a leader to articulate what we stand for, what will make us successful, what does the roadmap look like, and then give people a sense of voice. And that's why I say I prize independence and sovereignty, because people's voices have got to count. Their individuality can't be homogenized into we're all going that way and that's where we'll be in 3 years. And I think leaders have to be incredibly personal and incredibly communicative and constantly with their people, helping people to find their voice.
So setting the vision, that clearly is a job that needs to be done. I would come to Elaine actually here for a second. Because you're in a big organization, you have to tell people. It's frustrating if you don't. People out there who want to get commissions and programs need to know what's in your head. But you don't want to be too prescriptive. And then you need to keep your eye on who possibly could deliver that for you.
Yeah, that's right. I think You know, I think what Camilla was sort of saying there is hierarchy is the enemy of creative leadership in a way. I think I'm very interested in a football analogy. I'm not a big football fan, but I live with a boy who's obsessed, and I'm quite good on FIFA. But you know, football started off in English public schools, and it was a pyramid structure. You know, you had the goalkeeper, you had the centre-backs, the defenders, then you had the forwards, and it was very rigidly played, and if you were a defender, you weren't meant to go over the centre line, and the forwards were there but you knew where the goal was. And then, you know, Johan Cruyff came along in the 70s and invented this thing called total football. He said, well, why doesn't everybody play football in the team? Why doesn't everybody go all over the pitch? And then he, of course, went on to Spanish football and Barcelona, where, you know, the mantra is that you need to pass the ball to win. And winning is not about one guy on the pitch dribbling the ball from one end of the pitch to the other and scoring the goal. You have to be aware of where your other team members are. You have to work out where you're going to pass. You have to put yourself in a position to be passed to. Then you have to work out where. And it's a series of connections. And I think, but you know where the goal is. And I think that's always an incredibly useful metaphor for how you want a creative team to work. It's about knowing where your common goal is. And actually, your common goal can be a common enemy. But then you are creating a team where you've got complementary skills. You're all really aware of what each other's complementary skills are. But you are working as a team. You're finding space so that you can receive the ball and move it on. And I think that is what you have to try and do in a large organisation. And ITV is nowhere near as big as the BBC, but you have to try and sort of flatten it down somehow. The flatter the structure, the more creative it will be. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a sort of leader at the top, a kind of chief executive who does continually articulate what your goal is, but then you need to sort of disperse it down and flatten the structure and make sure that everybody is aware what their role in that team is.
One of the things we're talking about here is how far, we're talking about teams, which actually Tony Hall at the BBC has talked a lot about it, and I'm a big believer in that, in the sense that, so how do you, and Carrie, in your business, you've got writers, you've got directors, you've got what does the Royal Court mean? What's it about? What's its legacy? And what's it going forward to do? Let's not be too prescriptive. Let's open things up. How do you combine this thing of looking after the individual and putting together a group of people with complementary talents? How do you go about it in the theatre?
Well, I think one of the really interesting things that's coming out is about the distinction between leading a project and leading a team over a long period of time. And I think sometimes what happens in theatre, and I'm sure in television, is that there's a kind of attrition of care and attrition of energy from leaders to the team. So sometimes when you're working on a project, it's very immediate. It's like having an affair. You know, everyone's working together for a few months. The vision of the project's quite clear. It's easy as a director, producer to lead that team. And what I found working in theatres over sort of 5-6 year periods is that the people who are coming in to make the work every day, who are kind of running the whole team, who are trying to generate new project ideas, drop off a little bit, and they get less time, less thought, less attention from the kind of creative leadership. And I think it sort of becomes like a marriage in a way. You have to invest energy, time, detail, because those people are only coming to work in order to understand and try and realise the vision of the organisation. Otherwise, they sort of get lost inside it and they have no sense of what they're making.
What's the difference, Nick, with somebody creative and talented? You give them your vision, you talk to them, you encourage them. At what point, is there a danger sometimes when you're doing that? You might lead them somewhere, whereas they could lead you somewhere interesting and left field, which is where actually, if you're bold and brave, you may want to go rather than just being prescriptive. And this is a lesson for everyone, I think.
I think that's really important. I think if you tell people which direction to go in, then you'll only get to something you could have already thought of yourself. I mean, you have to be trying to find new things. And back to the point about teams, I think, if I'm really honest, I think sometimes people use this word creative and sort of functioning interchangeably. It should be taken as read that you have a team that sort of works, that you get the best out of people, they work together, all that kind of stuff. But that's just the starting point, I think. That's just basic management and people just doing their job rather than creative. I would hope that we would use creative to mean something much more special than that. And I think that you have to, if the garden just sort of delivers the number of programs we said we were going to deliver and the amount of turnover we said we were going to do and make satisfactory programs and everybody's kept in employment and that's it, then that's nothing like enough. You know, the point is to, if we just do that, then we're sort of become soulless and nothing particularly special. And so you have to, I think, as a creative leader, you have to be saying, we're going to do something more than that, and you have to allow in the organisation the space and the time for something more stellar to emerge out of that group of people and the kind of day-to-day grind of the work.
How much time do you think in organisations where there are, you know, you've got an ambition and you know the kind of thing you want to do, but how often do you get those, is it good to get people together in a group and do what people call brainstorming and stuff like that? We'll come to that in a bit, but maybe I jumped ahead of myself. But do you think, is that something, for instance, you've got lots of companies. What's your prescription to, not prescription,
no,
what do you suggest?
I think, you know, you've got to let people do their thing and then recognise a cycle and where people are. So in all three, there are 18 companies and they're little tribes, small, medium-sized companies with their own aspirations, their own genre competencies. So you've got to be able to create two things: space for a company to flourish on its own and to support it and enable it and to kind of help it forwards. And then occasionally, and you have to pick your moment, bring 4 or 5 creative group leaders together from different parts of the club, because it's a club which has some benefits associated with that. And then occasionally bring them together to say, it doesn't matter if this comes to nothing, but let's try something out of the ordinary. So you're working at 2 places. You're working on the ground to do the day-to-day as well as the stellar inside each company. But occasionally, you know, if you have Pat Llewellyn and Andrew Newman and Stephen Lambert and Neil Duncanson, you know, occasionally you can't resist bringing these charismatic people together to say, let's try something interesting from which some good things could be born.
Now tell me, in the advertising business, the client, you know, we've all watched Mad Men, haven't we? So we know a lot about it ourselves.
All very, very
so
accurate.
The client, how important is, now in broadcasting it's by and large, although this is all changing with Netflix and other things, there's a slightly different thing about autonomy or not autonomy, but the client is the important factor. We have this product, we want, so you don't have so many choices. How do you see advertising and the advertising world in terms of the vision of the strategy is dictated more by others, whereas inside television, do you think it's the same?
Well, I would challenge that because, in a way, the reason that clients come to advertising agencies and don't make their own work is they can't really dictate the ideas. So they have a vision for their company, whether you're Pepsi or whether you're Sainsbury's or BT, but they want you to release as an outsider stuff they can't see from the inside. So it's a very creative, very dynamic, very experimental. But the thing that really strikes me about television, and particularly being to Edinburgh here for the first time, is it's so upbeat TV. The big difference is that in advertising, as a creative company, you are selling an idea to somebody who innately is not creative. Yeah. I mean, there are some very enlightened, amazing people in these companies, but largely the guy at Mercedes is worrying about the design of the A-Class, or the guy at BT is worrying about broadband. So there isn't a shared vocabulary, there isn't even often a shared common goal, and what you're really doing is working really hard to get an idea sold, whereas in TV, creative people are coming together. The buyers and the sellers are both creative, they both share track records. I mean, it's amazing that the collisions that come together here, you share a common vocabulary. In advertising, it can be quite soulless to be selling an amazing idea. You know, good things come to those who wait, for Guinness, to somebody who's kind of going, well, you know, how many cans of Guinness are we going to sell?
That's an interesting thing, just to land with that point, which is well put, actually, that you can, in broadcasting, in television, have a conversation. You can talk to Peter Fincham or Charlotte and not imagine they're another world, they don't understand my language. So that should make it easier for us, as long as the leadership of these organizations and companies is still creative leadership, which is not the same, as we said, as being the hands-on person. Shall we look now at process and technique? How important, how do you go about it, in other words? What are the methodologies that can allow you to deliver this sort of end product creative result?
Do I believe that processes and techniques are important? Yes, I do. I think they're fundamental, I think they're vital, but I don't think they're the only piece of the jigsaw. Take Lionel Messi, the world's greatest footballer. Everyone knows he is a creative genius, but what they also know is that he has practiced and honed certain processes and techniques to be really good at what he does. So he knows in a given circumstance what to do, how to do it, when to do it. So I think processes and techniques, even for the very best in any field, are really, really powerful and important.
The important thing about all of this stuff, and the analogy I always use is a Formula One analogy, which is that there is a bit of a marriage between driver and car, and the tools and techniques you use are very much like the car. And an amazing car will not get around the track with a rubbish driver, whereas an amazing driver can take an average car and make it win.
What's the right environment for creativity? What's the wrong environment for creativity? I actually don't believe in that question. And the reason I don't believe in that question is I think from all the work that we've done, people can have very different creative styles. So I might be a very visual person, and I love working with sort of visual environments in a very sort of stimulating place. Someone else might be sort of much more introverted, much more kinesthetic. If you look at the root definition of the word creativity, it means to make connections. Yeah? More and more people are working in sort of disparate organisations, but if you're working on an innovation project where new thinking and connection is critical, I think it's all about finding ways to keep bumping into each other as a team.
The one thing that we have very differently here to other organisations is we have a genuine multidisciplinary team. So I have a guy from corporate finance, I've got a fashion designer, I've got an architect, I've got an engineer, a manufacturing person, and a pure consumer research person. And by creating an environment where you've got lots of conflicting, defensible and intelligent points of view, then you have a really interesting creative mix. We work really hard to give people a feeling of being a little bit at home. And my view is that if you have creative people, they should not be putting on a mask when they come to work. So they should not be coming to work and becoming a different person. It stops people from taking stuff home with them. And most of the good stuff, most of the good creative thoughts happen when you're not actually in the office and you're not with colleagues. And so if you're a different person in both places, I think it's very difficult to knit those two together.
One of the things that we've worked very hard at is thinking about different ways of working with consumers for creativity and innovation. Because what you're looking to do then is not get an insight which everybody has, you're looking to find something insightful that no one else has seen. So for example, we worked with an underarm deodorant company and we wanted to get new perspectives on underarm deodorants, an incredibly boring subject, unless you go and live with a group of armpit fetishists for a day, yeah? And they will tell you more about your armpits and how armpits are interesting than anybody else in the world. So that was about being with people who can bring you a completely different sort of perspective on the problem.
I saw a great analogy a while back actually, which was likening innovation to gardening, and it is very much like gardening. So stuff grows and you're not necessarily sure if it's going to be valuable or if it's going to turn into a hideous weed. And the secret is to weed early and effectively. So if something's not going to work and it's not going to go ahead, don't waste your energy on it. Just drop it quickly and move on to something that will work or has a better chance of success. Risk is an interesting concept. And, we're pretty scientific about everything we do. We measure everything. We've got some very robust methods of creating and collecting data around all of our activities. And so I think by the time we would decide to make any decisions or develop a new product, the risk is largely gone. We understand the market we're going into. We understand our customers really well, and we know that what we develop for them, they're going to love. And so I think the notion of creative risk is actually a slightly odd one for me, in that there's creativity and then there's risk, and those two things aren't necessarily compatible with each other. So I think be creative and manage the risk. Like the idea of a creative risk is a little bit of a sort of paradox in some ways.
That's kind of interesting. I mean, whether he's right or wrong, let's discuss it. I think it's weeding early. Right. here you are, you work in a group. If you may, are you weeding too early? I mean, that's the question. It must come up. Focus, we need focus. First of all, we know we've got the commissioning brief, sort of. We know in any organization which has leadership, there's a strategy, and it says these are the things we need to concentrate on. Once that's done, you know, if something comes left field a bit, and it looks in, do you kill early or don't you kill early? Nick, what about you?
Well, it is an interesting question. We sort of do both. I mean, we try and keep our development slate small. I think if you've got millions of ideas, then, and you sort of have this attitude that, oh, well, you never know, one of them might get commissioned, and you know, then it's sort of, there's something very depressing about that, and it means that it's not done with integrity, it's not heartfelt. So we try to keep the development slate small, and we all know when it's too big, and then we sort of start weeding. But on the other hand, the really special things are often the kind of tiny, tiny little half-thoughts that you might have for years, that is just a little hunch or something, and that don't, I mean, the rig shows, for example, that you know, that started with a family and then One Boy Every Minute and 24 Hours in A&E, and now there's lots of them, sort of began with a very, very quiet little hunch about something. And you have to have an environment where those things can be heard and not squished and weeded out too quickly.
I think you were mentioning brainstorms and how do you do brainstorms. I think that's the critical thing, really, that actually what you want is a space where creative conversation is enabled, and actually that can be in the pub after work. I think the way that I am a creative leader is sort of inseparable from me being a female, and that you know, one of the guys there mentioned that it's no use people putting on a different mask when they come to work, and I think that's incredibly important, that you want to create. I'm sort of nosily interested in the people who work with me in their private lives, and you know, I like their babies coming into work, and I like to meet their partners if that's what they also want. But I think you want to create this sort of... I set up an independent production company when I was pregnant, and then brought my baby into work in a Moses basket and had her under the desk for the first 9 months. So I was
bring your baby into work. That's
but what I mean is, you don't want this sort of separation from your life outside work and your life inside work. And I think, you know, somebody there talked about space, and it's true that people want to work in different kinds of spaces, and given the technology, we don't all necessarily need to be together. But I think then you do want to go out of your way to say, let's go to the pub after work, or let's have this moment on a Thursday night where we do all get together, because that is probably where the creative conversation is going to be most lively. And a formal brainstorm in a boardroom, perhaps with a group of commissioners with you, is maybe not the most creative space.
I'll just say one thing to that, because just very, very quickly, is that I think there's a really interesting thing in there, which is that it's not, of course, about keeping the rest of your life outside the room where you're talking about ideas, whatever. Absolutely, all of that needs to be in there. But actually, the bit that you need to keep outside is the kind of day-to-day bit of work, all that sort of stuff that's going on all the time. You need to keep that out of the way. And I think part of the job of any organisation, small or large, is to create sort of spaces, actual physical spaces in the organisation, or spaces in the diary or whatever, where all of that other stuff can be kept at bay.
Don't you have a glass?
We'll talk about your glass in a second, but here's what we're getting closer to. Carry on some extent. Even in a big company, is it possible to create, I'm certainly a believer in this, in a kind of family atmosphere. You know, in other words, where you can trust people to say, that wasn't a good idea, or that was, without feeling that there is going to be. This is what failure is about, as failing to succeed. Don't be afraid to speak. Don't be afraid to come up with an idea. Learn from failure. Learning from failure, I use this phrase, failing to succeed. In fact, I want to do, and at some point I am, when we stop worrying about how we're going to cut the budgets down and all that stuff, come to this idea of failing to succeed, because you have to succeed,
that is a tremendous challenge for you at the BBC, I think, because it is such an enormous organisation. And I think, you know, someone earlier on mentioned fear, and I think fear at the BBC obviously became a very kind of disturbing thing a few years back. And I think, you know, if you are able to achieve that, that would be a transformational thing to do, I think, to recreate that sense that it's okay to fail. Because I think, you know, from all the compliance issues that there were years ago, that has created a sort of a terror, actually, of failing. And I think, you know, it certainly was true at ITV as well. And you need to sort of have year zero where actually you say, look, we learned from all those very specific kind of compliance issues, but now creatively it's okay to
Well, I'm going to say something here because I am very, you know, being part of the BBC. I think the word compliance is a problem. Imagine this, isn't compliant the opposite of creative? Mm. Do we want compliant people? We don't. The BBC got into some trouble. In a sense, the thing is, you are going to get into trouble. You know, if you're Director General of the BBC, at some point something's going to happen somewhere down the line. You need to know how to respond to that. So I do agree that people need to feel they're in a safe environment in order to do things and take risks. And the things that you need to protect are the risks which are recklessness rather than
Exactly. And if I could say, that's why I think it's really important to understand what we mean by failure, because I think failure is a sort of really big, homogenized concept, and you kind of go, do we mean failure because someone did something illegal? I would call that a bit of a failure, but is it a failure if something little didn't grow into something big? That's not a failure. So, you know, it's that, am I allowed to say my Beckett quote now?
Yes, do it.
So I've got a I checked it with him beforehand because he is the intellectual. But there's a Samuel Beckett quote, which I think, you know, gives you another angle on failure, which is try, fail, try again, fail better. You know, so failure can be divided into things that absolutely must not happen, that, you know, accountability and trust is breached, that's a certain kind of failure. But often TV talks about the failure of a program, or that's not a failure, that was an ability and a capability in something that just didn't grow. That's not a failure, that's just something that didn't grow.
Let's discuss this. What is the essence of creativity is, first of all, our curiosity, asking questions, thinking, I wonder if that would be interesting, I wonder if I could join that up with that. One of the problems with leadership, creative leadership, is that you can begin to be very prescriptive. You can see, you can have a narrow vision. And we now live in a world out there which is so full of, people can communicate their idea just like that. You know, they can tell the world and suddenly it's viral and everybody knows. And therefore it's desperately dangerous today to be too closed and to be too...
Well, I think it's a real dilemma for broadcasters as well. Peter made this point that, you know, how ridiculous it is really that creative leaders are called controllers, because control is absolutely the wrong word, and it's an enabler,
very good note,
I suppose.
Actually, yes.
But also I think, you know, the explosion of different platforms and the explosion of the internet meant that there are so many different forms of distribution now that actually broadcasters historically have been very used to gatekeeping, and that actually now there's no need, you know, that role specifically is becoming less and less important because talented creative people have so many other places to go.
On that note, we need to move to the next section, which is actually about the culture and about talent, just as we learned. So let's watch that.
The best way to create an environment for creativity is, in my opinion, to offer freedom, a lot of freedom. This is not something you can organize in a kind of dictatorship situation. It's not something I expect you to do. What we need is a kind of platform, a safe environment.
Google's quite a complicated organization, and it's a large organization and a growing organization. And actually one of the things that I like to do is to try and create small groups within that, so to protect people from the everyday pressures of being part of that organization. So we do hive off small groups and create pods of people that can be, you know, small, it's 3 or 4 people who are working on their visions and their ideas that are part of a grander narrative. But if you don't give them the freedom to pursue that, then everyone tends to get caught up in a daily grind. Every person responds to different motivations. So there are some people like myself who just really want to be told that they're fabulous and isn't it going well, and, you know, I'll pretty much do anything for that. I'll roll over. And then there are other people who need sort of hard deadlines and need to understand very clearly what they're doing. Engineers, developers, those guys really prefer to be very kind of logistics driven. We have all our producers who are very, very fond of their call sheets and their tricks and their kind of long documents. And then I have my creatives, and some of them respond to praise and some of them respond to a good kicking.
In my opinion, the only way to be creative is if you have fun. I mean, if you have a lot of tension, if there's a lot of pressure, if there's fear, if you are scared to see someone, then you forget it. I mean, this is not what's creative. But if fun means that it's just chichi and every time then everything is easy to, no, it's not. It's real hard work.
Even the slightest sense of fear, of that there are repercussions, or that people are going to lose their jobs, or that there's not enough money, or it's exactly the same thing you protect your children from, and you should protect your teams from as well. You can't have them being concerned about the future, because it doesn't promote the freedom of expression and communication, and the idea that there are no limits to what we might create.
In this creative process, there's already a lot of tension. And there's, what I always liked, I mean, in 25 years of making exhibitions, what I always liked is when the concept phase, researchers, curators, and project managers, designers, architects come together. This is when blood comes out of that process. And that's the moment when I come in. Oh, doesn't want to talk about me, it could be someone else, but this is the moment when you have to lead the process. I think I'm not very good in giving rewards. I think I'm not very good in that, honestly. Probably because I think it's, if it's a success, then it is a success for all of us, and that is already a reward.
There are a lot of different reward mechanisms, and I think that Google hires very smart people, so I'm pretty sure they try to address all of them, whether they are about security, whether they are about comfort, whether they're about the environment that you work in, whether they're about financial reward, whether they're about intellectual reward and stimulation, whether they're about progress or growth. Ultimately, having M&Ms and ping pong tables and gaming consoles all over the place is a reward mechanism. It's a thing that makes you, actually for me, it's a thing that makes me want to bring my friends to work and say, look, I've never played on the games. I've never had a ping pong game, but I've shown them to my friends way more. So that's how I take that reward.
Now, after this, we're going to come to the audience, but I want to ask Carrie now, because this is really coming to the whole idea of what kind of environment do you create? How do you deal with individuals? How much time do creative leaders and should they spend looking, listening, looking after? What's your approach, and how do you go about this thing of nurturing that talent and responding to them?
In my experience over the last few years, I've sort of switched from running an organisation to being an artist inside one. And I've been working with David Lan a lot at the Young Vic, who's brilliant because he spends a lot of time. We meet every week, so we talk for an hour every week about the project that I'm evolving. But he's incredibly provocative. So you'll talk to him about a new idea and he'll always say, great, but have another idea. Have a better idea, let's talk again next week. And it's quite, at the start, it's quite kind of unnerving, but you feel really galvanised and provoked and kind of opened by him. And the other thing that Vicky Featherstone does at the Royal Court is she keeps telling me not to come to work, which I'm really enjoying. She just says, don't have a desk, I don't want you to answer email, that's not what I pay you to do. Go away, read a book, go and watch Smart, go to a live concert, do something completely different and have, again, a better idea and come back and we'll talk about it. So there's, with both of them, a combination of a lot of time, actually, and kind of care, but also a really strong feeling that you're being pushed and kind of pushed away almost from the daily grind of the organisation, which I think is ultimately, hopefully, quite freeing in terms of...
Again, a more difficult thing to do in a bigger organisation, not so difficult when you haven't got enough space to put people in, but the idea of a benign virtual environment where people can feel that if they need a different kind of space to be creative, they're allowed to have that. Would you say that's fair enough?
Absolutely, and not just physical space, but that they work in mental space. Yeah. And the guy talked about reward mechanisms, and obviously we're all aware of the various ladders of rewards. But I think people are rewarded when you ask them good questions. When there's nothing as rewarding as somebody asking you a question designed and preferably not answered by the person that asks the question. But, you know, a question says, I'm interested and I want to know what you're thinking and feeling. Is there a bigger, better idea? Does this need more time? Does it need more money? So I think the art of asking good questions gives someone a sense of recognition that I'm being asked a question to which I will give an answer rather than, you know, where's your next big idea and come to me when you've got it.
That's really well put. I quite agree with that as well, both those things. So quickly from Nick and from Elaine, and then we'll open it up. Nick, you've got a glass room somewhere, I gather.
We've got a room at the company. It's the best room in the company, and it's a room that you're only allowed to talk about ideas in it. And it's got nothing in it. So
Can you eat or anything?
Well, the rules aren't that strict. Okay. But we don't have other stuff in there. It's a copy, in a way, of, I was reading the Steve Jobs biography, and Johnny Ive's studio was a place that Steve Jobs would go to every day, and he could see all the products, the pipeline for the next 3 or 5 years or whatever, and he could hold them and touch them. So we don't keep all our ideas and development and everything on the computer. We have it all written up on, we write all over the glass walls, and you can see it all, and we can talk about it all there, and it just feels like it's sort of, all the other stuff is out of the way, it's just for ideas, so it's kind of like our little cathedral for ideas.
I'll just note that I was just with Frank Gehry recently in the States and with Thomas Heatherwick here, Frank Gehry, the great architect. And this whole issue about he's doing Zuckerberg's environment for Facebook too. The whole question now of the place you go to work and how you enjoy that space, once upon a time that might be considered to be irrelevant, but actually it's kind of important, even if it's partly the virtual space. You still physically, you're in a physical environment where the relationships and the way it is fun to go to, and you can keep that in your head when you're somewhere else. So Elaine, finally, anything to add?
No, I would just briefly say, I mean, we don't have luxurious, I'm very jealous of the Google offices. We don't have luxurious offices at ITV. We're in the tower and it's all very restrictive, but I'm quite big on cushions. I think cushions are quite, you know, I do think you need to go into a room where the environment just feels different. It's not desks. And at ITV, rather disconcertingly, we have faces of the ITV talent on the cushion. So you find yourself sitting on Ant and Dec, which is sort of possibly not quite right. But I do think you want to perhaps create something that feels a bit more domestic than it does kind of formal boardroom structure in order to have creative conversations.
What's really disconcerting is having a meeting with Kevin Liger at ITV Studios, because the first thing he says when you walk into the room is soft or hard.
Okay, so we're now going to open it up to questions. If we put possibly some, I don't know if we get any more light, but can I see a few hands up? I can't see any. Is that me being blind, or is someone? No, that guy over there, that gentleman there in the middle. If you want to address it to anyone in particular, or if it's the panel.
No, it's just to the panel. I think email is the most horrible thing that is almost invented for production people. When you go into the BBC, the sort of Orwellian media centre, the phones don't ring. And people don't talk to one another. People are very awkward about talking to one another, and they hide behind email. There's a great book called The 4-Hour Workweek, which says you should have email breaks in the day. You should put an out of office and say, I will answer your email between midday and 12:30, and at 6. In between times, I'm doing other things. I'm working. I'm not on email.
Good point. Yes, that gentleman over there.
Isn't there another issue here that we're sort of slightly ignoring? And that I think there are a few of us on the floor here who were surprised by the survey at all. And I can't think, but my name is Charles Sturridge, I'm Chairman of Directors UK, I should say, and I'm a director. I can't think there's anybody here who didn't feel, hearing about the experience of the theatre, that this is a completely alien environment to the way television works. And one of the reasons is because it's plural. Because there are different structures, different organisations, Theatre Royal Drury Lane, Crucible Sheffield, the Royal Court, all of which have clear and different agendas, but the same people, the same directors, the same actors, and to some extent the same producers can move freely between them, understanding the different criteria that they require and working within that environment creatively. I was at the commissioning meeting yesterday discussing that survey, an incredibly shocking survey about the appalling treatment that commissioners give to independents coming in. On the board, there were 3 ex-BBC controllers. i.e. now controllers of different television companies. The same three people have been controlling different companies for over a decade. The phrase that was most often heard in that meeting was, I agree with Peter, I agree with Jay. They all had a similarity of intention, and we're quite proud of that they all roughly wanted the same things. What we suffer from, surely, in television, and who thinks we now make the best television? Who doesn't see that other people are making better, more innovative programs than us? What we suffer from is being a dependent culture. We are not an independent group of program makers. We are dependent upon the approval of a tiny group of commissioners. I mean, that you can almost count on the fingers of one hand, who all have a broadly similar agenda. And that, I think, dependency, I think, and lack of independent encouragement, lack of interest in people being independent, lack of interest and encouragement in people being original, is what is holding us back.
Okay, well, let's have some more comments from the floor about that, even if it follows up from that. I mean, the one question one would ask is this unique to the United Kingdom, do you think? You think there are other, you think the American networks have got a completely different approach and attitude?
I think there's more plurality there, and that therefore you see within that system, and who can deny this, far more potent original programming coming out.
I couldn't disagree more. I think the UK leads the world in original, innovative programming, and I think the States has some brilliant drama, of course it does, but in terms of formatted, factual and entertainment shows, the UK has been leading that for the last 10 years, and I'm sure it's an imperfect system, and there were lots of kind of incredible warning signals about that commissioning survey yesterday, but you know, what's interesting about what's happening in media now is that you will have the opportunity to put your content on many different platforms.
No, I think that is fantastic.
You can do without the broadcasters if you choose.
Let me just say one thing, though, about this. But you've got a slightly odd view of what the world is like. There are entertainment formats. If you look at the entertainment formats, and this is possibly, you could say, a negative. They are British, and in fact, they're ours. You know, they're BBC and ITVs, essentially. They have, across the world, Strictly Come Dancing, Dancing with the Stars, all these things, the Britain's Got Talent. And in a way, that, so it's not just the UK. There is, and this is a proper point that you're making, that there is a danger about globalization, that we really end up getting the same shows. Breaking Bad and Broadchurch are all being done in different languages. So there's a kind of danger that the cultural diversity that is possible and that sits on a, might actually be narrowed down by the kind of commercial imperatives and of the world we're looking at now. It is danger. Other people? A couple more questions.
This guy.
Yes, yes.
Behind you.
My name is David Graham from a company called Attentional. I think the most interesting, I mean, I found this fascinating and constantly was thinking about how badly I run my own team and what to do about that when the bank holiday's over.
Yeah.
But for me, the most interesting thing about this event was Vince Gilligan, because he came from a totally different tradition that we don't share. Been watching films from the age of 7, learned about films from his parents, went to a film school, started his job, started the main part of his career on X-Files, which is an institution that we don't have. That's a program independently run by a showrunner, reporting to a studio, and building a career on the basis of that, so that when he got to the climax of his career as we know it, he said, I'm going to make a show that does something different. I'm going to have a good guy that turns bad. And he turned that into a success, and he didn't expect, you know, he'd been out of work for 2 years when that happened. I mean, I don't think we can share that because we're a different structure, we're a different country, and we don't have the size or the scale. But there was something there that I think told us there's something here that we are missing, and I'm not sure what the answer is as to how we get it. But we don't have a film education system, we don't have a production education system that matches what they've got in the States. And that's why, as a parent, I've had to spend money sending our children to film school in the US, which I'd rather not have done.
Well, David, David Graham, of course, has been in the industry for a long time and has seen a lot going on. I'd just say we're going to have to stop there, but I'll just say that notion of a showrunner and the role of a showrunner in America, and the fact that there are a few of those guys who have creative control is an interesting phenomenon. It's also hugely commercial and has enormous potential out there. So we're talking about a world, that's all I can say today beyond this discussion. This is just the beginning of a debate from how you treat individuals, and if you treat that individual well, they could end up being Vince Gilligan and end up with Breaking Bad. So the question of the culture, which is the last thing we're talking about, how we can make it possible and easier for people to have ideas and get those ideas out there, and how we can ask the right questions, creative leaders, and create the right environment for people. That's the most important thing. I just want to thank the panel, thank all of you for being here today. Sorry if we didn't get to answer all your questions, and I hope, though, it's been some stimulus for discussion and debate. Thank you very much indeed.